Internet. Welcome to episode 78 and part 2 of the Rules of the Internet series in Deep Fried Neurons podcast. I tried my best to keep this short, and I hope you enjoy part 2. I do think part 1 is consequential, so if you haven't heard part 1, part 2 won't make sense to you, so please go listen to part 1 before you start part 2. And if you already have fun. Cue the fucking... a boo-boo. I think I should let you guys know about it. So basically, in Rules of the Internet Part 1, the mask I was talking about while I was talking about Anonymous, the internet hacktivist group, I said the mask was the face of Guy Fieri, and I didn't realize that my stupid brain has confused Guy Fieri and Guy Fawkes, or Guy Fawkes, I think. That's how his name is pronounced. Anyway, Guy Fieri is a chef, and Guy Fawkes was allegedly a British terrorist whose death is now celebrated. Wow, celebrated across U.S. I think not England, and not death like hanging, whatever. And that's a difference that you should note. And I would be lying if I told you that was deliberate, but also somebody who just heard part 1 of Rules of the Internet will now be roaming around telling how Guy Fieri's mask is potentially the face of Anonymous. And I just think that's beautiful. Like, if there is a possibility of that to exist, if they don't Google it or don't catch my mistake, that is possible. And I think that's beautiful. I hope that I haven't done any damage with misinformation yet. But here it is on the record. I'm correcting myself, and I'm genuinely sorry. You deserve better than that. And to continue onwards, we stopped at Rule 14, and now we're reading Rule 15 of Rules of the Internet. The harder you try, the harder you will fail. Now, of course, this is a reference as to the higher you reach, the harder you fall. It's true. Basically, the more success you have, the more you have to lose, especially in a capitalistic system. And I understand that. I sort of see that as a evolutionary or naturalistic at some point. But I think there is a much more interesting thing which is very limited to the internet. Not limited, but like seen only through the lens of internet. I've been mentioning this over and over and over again throughout this podcast or podcast series, that the internet has an unforgettable memory, or it is unforgivingly permanent in its record, which is true. And that sort of comes back to Rule 15. I don't know if you know, but I think 2014 or 2016, the European Union has a very landmark ruling called Right to be Forgotten. Mario Costeja Gonzalez versus Google, I think. That's the name of the case. I was recently reading it, is why I remember. Basically, this man sued Google and asked them to take down some information which was private to him, and in case he wanted to change, and his debt record might not allow that. So he did, and now he's world famous for the man who had debts in 1998, who asked Google in 2014 to, clear the record of his debts. So it's a self-feeding cycle. So in an attempt to make the internet forget who he was, he reminded all of us who he is, and throughout the history of the world, he will be known as the man with debts in 1998 who tried to make everyone forget that that's all that was to him. He will be no one else ever. Think about that. So the harder you try to distance yourself from your past, the more swiftly it will catch up with you. That's sort of the lesson to be learned here, I think. One of the ways to go about it, go read about it. Mario Costeja Gonzalez versus Google. It's a European case, a landmark judgment. I think India cited that judgment or drew parallels to that judgment when we were doing rights to privacy in our country. K. Puttaswamy versus Union of India. That's the Indian privacy law rule. And after that, if you fail in epic proportions, it may just become a winning failure. Now, the greatest example of this is a masterpiece of a movie called The Room. I don't know if any of you have watched it. And thank you to Madhvi Mahoney, a regular listener of the podcast and a dear friend of mine, who introduced me to Neil Breen. Not that I didn't know about him, I knew about him because a bunch of people made videos about him. But she actually put me through the surreal experience of watching Neil Breen's films. And dear God, is it bad? It is so bad that it's good. And that's sort of what this rule is aiming at. And this is way before the time that we saw cringe watching or cringe pop as a big thing. But if you're too bad, you actually end up being good, is sort of the rule of the internet fame. Everyone fails eventually. That's rule 17, and that's just the law of entropy. I mean, I don't know what else to add here, to be honest. I'm thinking of a very internet example of this. I would give the example of Joe Rogan, like how Reddit is starting to turn on Joe Rogan, especially after the little exchange between Bill Burr and Joe Rogan recently on his podcast. I think I saw a Reddit post about how, or I was sent a Reddit post about how Joe Rogan used to be this place for mildly curious people, and now it's just elk juice memes and Joe trying to make fun of everything. Not to mention the $100 million deal that just went through. So, well, you decide. To be honest, also it comes down to heroes, because if you have a permanent record of your heroes you don't like how they changed. Celebrity culture is a genuine threat today from Twitter because, well, the people who used to worship them have sort of put them under the bus, and they're the ones who put them on a pedestal in the first place as well. It's just the celebrity's fault to accept the pedestal, I guess. That's the best I can assume. I mean, that's the most accountability I can put on them, but, well, the truth remains that the virtue signaling in some of their protest art isn't exactly well accepted to this day, or just the cringy shit that they end up doing because of the way the world works now, the idealism that we attach to celebrity worship, especially America. Not to say India is any different, because we have a huge culture of uh, celebrity worship. If you haven't heard of nepotism in Bollywood, it is quite the talks today. I don't want to expand on the topic because I think there are experts who are better historians of the topic, and the problem is pretty self evident. I think you should be able to do the math by yourself. And basically, what they mean is all your gods are false, and you will find the faults in them eventually, even if they win. Uh, a win is just a high in a time, but most of life is just mediocre moments, and you will probably live with them. You will live in mediocrity, experiencing highs of amazing lives in the middle, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Try to understand that having a life that is non-eventful is not a bad thing at all. It's just try to make it eventful sometimes, just enough for you to be interested, is all. Rule number 19: the more you hate it, the stronger it gets. Belle Delphine. Everybody claims to hate it, everybody loves it. OnlyFans accounts. There's so many memes I saw about simping out on OnlyFans. I thought everybody hated OnlyFans for being a pornographic website, or how it was milking money for sexual interaction or something like that. Listen, on an important note, sex work is work. Nothing wrong with that. And if you're getting money for sexual interactions with your body, you know what? Not my problem, especially on the internet. If it's pornographic, definitely not my problem. Do what you want. But it's just that the more you hate it, the more attention you bring to it, and the more stronger it gets. Like I said, Divyangana Trivedi, she would not have the following she has if she didn't generate intense hate in people. That's why provocateurs do so well on the internet. It's because they provoke, they hate intensely, and intense hating sort of gets views. Uh, any kind of extreme will, to be honest. And that's rule number 19. Now, rule number 20 is my favorite. Nothing is to be taken seriously. I understand that this could be interpreted very, 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 very widely, and you will have your average edgelord who tweeted "No lives matter" during the Black Lives Matter protest, as if they were a very good intellectual. missing the point of the protest and the No Lives Matter hashtag altogether. Um, you're wrong, to be honest. Like, the entire point of saying Black Lives Matter is because there's discrimination. I think you might have missed the point there. But nothing is to be taken seriously is, of course, a shout out to nihilism, a philosophy that I genuinely believe is spreading day by day, especially because of the internet. The information overload, I talked about this in MAM3, plug, go check it out, where information access sort of gives you the perspective to know that nothing really matters. All the institutions that you've put faith in are fundamentally flawed, and if you see flaws in them, you will more and more realize that they have very obvious problems with them. And if you're settling for a praxis, it's genuinely a very, very big compromise from your ideals. And something is wrong with that, in my opinion. That settling for a praxis, I mean, be very critical of the things you accept to do, is what I'm trying to tell you. And nothing is to be taken seriously is also a shout out to Richard Rorty, a philosopher that I read very recently, actually. And he sort of talks about final vocabularies. I've talked about this in another episode before. Final vocabularies that people create to talk about life and their observations in life, so that they can guide towards a more objective truth that will help them be lived and live morally and ethically better than they were before. And for that reason, no institution needs to be sacred, no institution needs to be taken seriously, which is why he's an ironist. And worth reading, definitely. I forget the name of the book, but Google Richard Rorty. I think the first book that comes up, I think something about relevance of truth and pragmatism, something like that, is the title of the book. Why do I keep forgetting book titles? I'm so sorry. After that, we have rule number 21. Original content is original only for a few seconds before getting old. And, well, if you've been around on the channel, I think you've also seen MAM2. Plug, go check it out. Am I just plugging my... I'm so sorry. Anyway, so the reason I say that is because originality as a concept doesn't exist. And there is a very fair reasoning to that most people would agree with. You were born with a biological instinct of something that has been inherited by genetics, a protein that essentially is a roadmap as to how to direct fats and muscles and sugars and carbohydrates for you to form as a multi-organ system level organism from a cell. And that's how, like, you gained all of that from your genetics. Your parents, sort of, when they decided to have sex, they gifted you with these genetics. Gifted is a strong word. Gave you, or you inherited those genes from them. So that's not you. After that, everything you learn, from language to authentic thought to emotions, is your interaction of your genetics with your environment. So the sense of self that you have is not authentic. I think we talked about this in Where Did You Buy Your Identity as well. I forget the number of the episode, forgive me, but you'll find it if you search Where Did You Buy Your Identity in the podcast list. It's recent, it's in the 60s, I think 61 to 60 was one of those episodes. And original content sort of means that if you have an original idea, it will be original only for seconds, and after that everyone will copy it, because that's how it works. Even memes, one of the best part about them is that they're easily copyable and replicable, especially the ideas that they promote, which is why they keep spreading so fast. And I genuinely recommend, if you have the time and patience, to check out Kirby Ferguson or Craig Ferguson. Kirby Ferguson's series called Everything is a Remix. It sort of talks about originality as a concept and not existing, and it uses examples from popular culture to music to literature, everything. It's one of the best things I've ever seen on originality and copyright law. After that, we'll talk about copy pasta. Rule number 22 and 23. Copy pasta is to ruin every last bit of originality. Copy pasta is made to ruin every last bit of originality. Did you see what they did there? So clever, no? I hate this joke. I'm so sorry. The first time I read it, I thought it was the most funniest thing in rules of the internet. But as I've grown older, I've come to realize just it's so tiring. Anyway, rule 22 and 23 talk about copy pasta, which is essentially copying something in internet history that got very popular and pasting it in appropriate context, which is essentially a lot of the memeing today is the enemy of originality. One of the most popular and my favorite copy pastas is the Rick and Morty fan going on giving himself a blowjob, bending over backwards and giving himself a blowjob in a Reddit comment where he understands the nuances of Rick and Morty and the nihilism and the absurdism, and it's just so cringy. As if everybody else can't see the bigger subplots and that. We understand, you get it, you appreciate the show a lot, and write a video essay. I'm not opposed to it. It's just the condescension and gatekeeping could be kept at bay, and similar with the one about women born after 1993 don't know anything but ordering from McDonald's and coloring their hair and shit like that. Same with that meme that it kept going around. Something maybe shit your pants, maybe piss and cum, and use that blog button. Basically that's the copy pasta, and copy pastas usually become big memes that everybody keeps repeating for a bit and then everybody forgets about them, and they are enemies of originality, but their repetition is sort of the charm, if you catch my drift. I believe that I generally disagree that they are the enemies of good content. They are enemies of originality, don't get me wrong, but the repetition is the essence. And to be honest, social life is sort of, I said this earlier in a podcast with somebody else, that originality is repetition is sort of essence of social life. Like, if you want to be productive and contributive to the social life in your current time, you're gonna have to risk some repetition, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. Having that said, read some copy pastas. I feel like you could have genuinely good cultural moments in your life if you read copy pastas and use them in the right place. Just don't overdo them, please. Overdoing copy pastas is what kills them, and that's why we don't see them after they become mainstream memes. Then there's rule number 24: every post is a repost of a repost. Again, we're copying Fight Club because internet intellectual culture is plagued with Fight Club, isn't it? Like, I love you, David Fincher, and I love this film, but dear God, the fans are everywhere. If you remember the Starbucks cup and the Xerox copy machine, and uh, Edward Norton's monologue about how everything is a copy of a copy, that's what this is a shout out to, number one. Number two, also, reposting is an important part of meme culture. I think I talked about it in MAM2 as well, that reposting sort of signifies that we're not afraid to let ideas spread and jokes spread, and that's a good thing in most circles, to be honest. I don't see why you shouldn't repost. Reposting should be one of the most fundamental parts of internet culture, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is just an observation, again, not a rule. Author of rules of the internet. Then we go to rule number 25. Relation to the original topic decreases with every single post. That's not just internet. I feel like that's a genuine life thing as well. Like, I'll illustrate with an example. Me and my friend Karan, who runs Bad in Bollywood, if you know him, shout out to Karan and Bad in Bollywood, really good podcast. Is we were gonna go get some Japanese food, and we were talking about how good teriyaki sauce is, and eventually we ended up talking about how the church is bad and we need to shield children from worship of anything, really, and how worship in general is dangerous. And this keeps happening with me and my friends, is that we start talking about something and we start talking about something else. For example, a conversation about Rick and Morty recently turned out about H.P. Lovecraft and how he was a racist person, and how most of the heroes and literary figures that we admire are sort of really problematic people with backward, crazy shit ideas. Um, Also, speaking of H.P. Lovecraft, just a tiny coincidence that I'm going to share is that the one place where in America, which is where my podcast is most famous, for some reason, uh, the biggest listening community is in Providence, Rhode Island. Whoever you are, shout out to you. Um, and that's the birthplace of H.P. Lovecraft, who happens to be one of the most influential writers in horror and cosmic horror literature. I do think he was a horrible person who wrote some really beautiful books. Also very troubled. So just pointing that out. Do with what you would in that with that information. Uh, After that, we have repost after repost. Yeah, any topic can be easily turned into something totally unrelated. That is also true. Usually, I don't know if you've heard Bad in Bollywood or when they're on the podcast, we sort of started this series called Tangents, um, where we just don't talk about anything in particular, and those episodes are just meant for me to have fun. We have done two of them so far, 50 and 75, because multiples of 25 they mean something. Apparently they don't, they really don't. Nothing means anything. But we just wanted to have fun, and we just jump from topic to topic. We start from talking about how BDSM is actually Bible discussion study meeting, and end about how Wolf of Wall Street is a genuinely misunderstood piece of art. So I think that illustrates my point. If you want a live illustration, go listen to that episode 75 again. And then we have episode rule number 27: always question a person's sexual preferences without any real reason. Now, rule number 27 describes how far we've come from that time. This was a time when we could say gay and it was haha. Not we, as in society, even in the West. We recognize homophobia to be a big problem now, because I mean, especially because I live here in India. We in 2018 we finally saw that being gay was not a crime in this country, and like it was read out under unnatural offenses, which is section 377. But homophobia is very real, and some of these people grow up in homophobic atmospheres, and they themselves are homosexuals, which inherently causes a lot of psychological trauma and problems for them to grow up. So my humble request to anybody in my audience: please don't question anybody's sexual preferences. How about this? I know some of you are concerned that your friends might have unnatural orientations, so let's stick to what we know and not jump to conclusions based on our biases and raisings, and let's do proper research. So as far as my research goes, if somebody doesn't have a sexual orientation that prefers animals, dead bodies, or children, leave them alone. If they prefer a person dressed as an animal, that's none of your business. I'm sorry, that's a loophole that's allowed. So yeah, just don't bother people. It's okay. Rule number 28: always question a person's gender, just in case it's really a man. Now this has cultural context. I'm not going to justify the statement. Please don't question people's gender either. Apparently there's a lot of confusion there as well. You and I can't relate because we're cisgender people who conform to the gender identity that our bodies are born in. But there is about 4 to 6% of the population of the earth that is humans who don't conform to that, and I believe that they should be able to figure out their confusions autonomously in their own right. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there is an interesting story to be told here. Internet has a long history of thirsting across women, which is because to this day the internet population is 61% male, and a lot of them very horny and very lonely. All of them very horny and very lonely. I'm just joking. And women on internet had this special presence because they were not seen, and everybody would act like it's a boys hostel where they saw a woman. So catfishing became very popular, where a man would pretend to be a woman. It's popular to this day. It's making a big comeback actually now. Somebody's doing streams where they act like a woman to woo other gamers, and then they reveal that they're a dude. And well, I don't really approve. I understand all of us might have a history where we catfished one of our friends for fun, but it's not funny. I think we've grown out of it, and we should discourage it as much as we can. And also, don't hurt people. Don't catfish them for years and years. I believe maybe 2 minutes is an acceptable time when you were 14 in 2010. Um, but beyond that, I don't think it's exactly a good practice. After that, of course, the interesting story that I wanted to share is that a lady from China who's a streamer made the revelation that she's not actually a trap, which is a woman dressed as a man, but she's actually a woman. She's not a man dressed as a woman, but actually a woman, and her stream was actually legitimately mad about that. And it just goes to show that everybody hates being lied to about gender. So please don't do that. And rule 27 and 28 is sort of just it's a sign of how far we've come and how laws are changing from time to time. So these laws have completely changed. Thank you very much. That's the end of part 2. If you made it this far into the podcast, please like, share, subscribe, and show your support. I have a YouTube channel. The podcast is available literally everywhere that you can think of as of a podcasting platform. And show your support on Patreon if you think the content is worth it. The link is down in the description. And I have been making these, video essays that I never talk about and that you should check out. They're YouTube exclusive. They're called Musings About Memes. I'm quite proud of that content.